Go ahead and open your first step book that looks like this. We're going to turn to page 5. So go ahead and turn to page 5 in your first step dark blue book. Here's page 5. And we are going to be looking at number 2. You see a line of notes on the G clef and a line of notes printed with the F clef. And for this video, we're specifically going to be looking at the notes for the G clef. We'll do the F clef at another time. By the end of this video, we are going to be naming all of these notes. This may sound a little bit overwhelming at this point, so let's go ahead and review just a little bit from the previous lessons. When something seems tricky or overwhelming, let's go back and look at something we do know and use what we do know to figure out some things that we don't know or some things that are harder to know. So let's take a look at our staff and review a couple of the lines that I think we would know best. So first of all, we know that this is a G clef because it circles the G line, and we know that this is an F clef because the large dot of the F clef is on the F line. We also learned a long time ago that the lowest line of the staff is low G. Like we just mentioned, this is F because it sits on the F clef line. Here's middle C, and it's usually pretty easy for us to identify right there in the middle of the two staves. This, like we mentioned, is G because it sits on the G clef line. And finally, we learned high F a long time ago because it is the topmost line of our staff. We've also talked a lot about intervals in the past, and we have learned that the interval from a line to a line is the interval of a third. And we've also learned that any sounds or notes going from a line to a space is the interval of a second. So let's go back to page 5, and we are going to look at the line with the G clef on it. Let's do the first 2 notes together, and then I'm going to have you do as many notes as you can figure out. I'm going to have you label as many notes as you can in 2 minutes. Okay? So let's do the first 2 notes together. I see this first note is on the middle line of the G clef, and maybe you know it right away, and that's wonderful. If you don't, maybe I'll help you figure it out. So if it were me and I didn't know what that note was, I would go back and say, but wait, this is only one line above the G clef line. So this is a third above the G clef line. So I can either look at the piano or envision a piano in my head and think, what is a third above G? And we know that a third above G is B. So I would label it B. Let's do one more note together. I see that note, and if I know it, great. You may know it, and that's wonderful. Go ahead and label it. If you don't, I would use this same type of method that I just walked through to figure out B. I would say, okay, well, this is only an interval of a second or 1 step below the G clef line. So here's G, but this note's 1 step below it. So I can go back to my piano and think, what is 1 step below G? And I can look, and it's F. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I am going to set a timer for 2 minutes. And I want you to label as many notes as you can. If you only label 1 or 2, that is just fine. That is a great start. If you label more than that, that's wonderful too. If you want to work longer than 2 minutes, that's completely fine. Go ahead and just pause the screen on the next slide, and you can work for as long as you want. Let's go ahead and do just the G clef line. I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes. You can begin. Okay, that's the end of 2 minutes. Let's go ahead and go through these notes together. We've already labeled our B and F. The next note is just one step above middle C, and that is D. Here's G, right on the G clef line. And then a third below G is E. Then we jump way up high to almost the top of the staff. We know the top line of the staff is high F, so we look one step below high F for an interval of a second, and we find E again. There's A, D, D, and middle C. Here is C again. Then we go up to the top of the staff again, but instead of below high F, we now see a note above high F. An interval of a second above high F is G. Here is G again on the treble clef line, or G clef line. E, B, G. There's that E again, pretty high on the staff. F. There's high F. A. And again, we find middle C. Next we see F, B, A, D, D, C, high F. Here's G again on our G clef line. There's G above our high F line. C, and finally, we end with middle C again. Now I'd like you to go take just a couple minutes, choose one finger on your right hand, just your pointer finger maybe, and go ahead and play through all of these notes on the piano.